Welcome to the Public Facilities and Improvements module. As a reminder, the topical capacity building component is intended to provide more details on one or more components that were covered briefly during the live training session. In this session, we will learn how to use CDBG funds in support of new housing construction and special assessments, and we'll touch on selecting the correct CDBG national objective, either low, mod housing, or low mod area benefit, the type of entities that can fund public improvements, cost reasonableness and procurement, Davis-Bacon applicability. And finally, we will discuss two different approaches for administering special assessments in connection with public facilities or infrastructure improvement activities. In the live training video, which can be found at the end of this module, we learn that CDBG cannot be used for new construction of housing, except when the construction is housing of last resort under the Uniform Relocation Act, housing developed by CBDOs, or special needs facilities considered a public facility under the regulations. For new construction of housing that does not qualify under one of those three exceptions, there are other, separately eligible CDBG activities that may be undertaken to support the low and moderate income housing activity, as shown in the checklist on the screen. The list of HUD, IDIS matrix code definitions is a great way to identify the appropriate CDBG eligible activity when setting up the activity in IDIS. One of those separate eligible activities that may be undertaken in support of the development of new low or moderate income housing is the provision of public improvements. Three common examples of public improvements that may benefit a project for the new construction of housing include water or sewer improvements, street improvements, and improvements to sidewalks. Water or sewer improvements includes the installation or replacement of water lines, sanitary sewers, storm sewers, and fire hydrants, as well as the costs of street repairs or repaving that is made necessary as a result of the water or sewer improvements. Water or sewer improvements are included under IDIS Matrix Code 03J. Street improvements includes installation or extension of the useful life of streets, street drains, storm drains, curbs and gutters, tunnels, bridges, and traffic lights or signs. The activity may also include streetscaping, such as landscaping, street lighting, and street signs. Street improvements would be performed using IDIS Matrix Code 03K. Sidewalk activities include the installation of new sidewalks or replacement of damaged sidewalks. Sidewalk activities may also include the installation of trash receptacles, lighting, benches, and trees. Public improvements in support of new housing are only eligible for CDBG assistance if the improvements are 1. In public ownership, and 2. Carried out by the recipient or other public or private nonprofit entities. To illustrate the difference between the new housing construction activity, which is not eligible, and the public improvements activity, which is eligible if it is in public ownership and is carried out by the recipient or a nonprofit, one can picture a sink connected to a drain line that takes waste from the sink to a residential sewer lateral beneath the foundation, connected to a residential sewer main line that takes waste to the main sewer line in the street. A public improvement activity would be work performed on the main sewer line in the street because that line is in public ownership, and generally, work on that line is carried out by the CDBG recipient or other public entities. A housing activity would be work performed on the residential sewer main, residential sewer lateral, drain lines, or kitchen sink. The first key implementation issues to consider is selecting the appropriate national objective for the public improvements in support of new housing construction. There are a couple of national objective options to consider. The first is low and moderate income housing. Select this option if the beneficiaries of the public improvements will be the residents of the new housing. The second is low and moderate income area. Select this option if the beneficiaries of the public improvements will be the residents of the new housing as well as residents of surrounding properties because the improvements also serve residents of the surrounding area. The second implementation issue is determining ownership. Who owns the improvements to be constructed? If the recipient or another public agency owns the improvements qualify for CDBG funding. If the improvements are owned by any other non-public entity, they would not qualify for CDBG funding. The third implementation issue is the construction. Who is carrying out the public improvements? Public improvements carried out by the CDBG recipient, such as city, county, or other unit of general local government, are considered eligible. Public improvements carried out by another public agency, such as a municipal utility company, a joint powers authority, or a different unit of general local government, are considered eligible. In the earlier example of the sewer line, a local water district that is a joint powers authority may be paid to perform upgrades to the main sewer line that is necessary in order to facilitate the development of housing. Public improvements carried out by a private, nonprofit entity are also considered eligible. Using the same example, the local sewer authority may require the housing developer to make the improvements to the sewer line. If the housing developer is a nonprofit entity, this would be an eligible use of CDBG funds for public improvements in support of housing. If the developer is a for-profit entity, this would not be an eligible use of CDBG funds because a for-profit is not one of the types of entities that may implement a public facilities and improvements activity. The fourth implementation issue is cost reasonableness and procurement. How do you ensure cost reasonableness? If the activity is implemented as part of the construction of the housing, cost analysis must be performed as part of the larger project. If the activity is implemented as a standalone construction contract, independent cost estimates need to be performed for the scope of work before procuring the construction contract using an acceptable procurement method, such as formal, sealed bids. The final implementation issue is Davis-Bacon applicability. Does Davis-Bacon apply to just the work on the public improvements, or does it now apply to the entire housing project? The answer to this question could significantly impact overall project costs. If the public improvements are implemented as a separate construction contract by an entity other than the housing developer, such as the recipient or another public agency, Davis-Bacon is triggered for the work on the public improvements, such as construction contract assisted with $2,000 or more. If the public improvements are implemented as part of the development of the housing by contractors hired by the housing developer, Davis-Bacon is triggered for both the public improvements work and the housing construction as well, if there are 8 units or more. In addition to these implementation issues, grantees may encounter other issues administering public facility and improvement activities. Administrative issues. Administering special assessments. Some communities use special assessments to generate revenue for public improvements. An example of a special assessment can be the removal of overhead power lines that are put underground or the installation of sewer pipes for an entire neighborhood. In this section, we will learn how special assessments may be used. Special assessments are used to recover the capital costs of a public improvement through a fee levied or a lien filed against a parcel of real estate, either as a direct result of the benefit derived from the installation of a public improvement or as a one-time charge made as a condition of access to the improvement. In order to recover CDBG funds used to pay for all or part of the cost of a public improvement, special assessments may be imposed. To recover CDBG funds only against properties owned and occupied by non-LMI persons, and such assessments are program income, or to recover non-CDBG monies, provided that CDBG funds are used to pay the special assessment on behalf of all properties owned and occupied by LMI persons. CDBG funds do not have to be used to pay special assessments on behalf of properties owned or occupied by moderate income residents if the grantee does not have sufficient CDBG funds to pay the assessments on behalf of all the LMI owner or occupants. CDBG funds may be used to pay for special assessments for public improvements that are not initially assisted with CDBG funds, provided that the installation of the public improvements was carried out in compliance with all applicable requirements, such as environmental, citizen participation, and Davis-Bacon. The public improvement meets a national objective, And the CDBG funds are used to pay the special assessment on behalf of all LMI owner-occupants, or for low-income owner-occupant only, if there are not sufficient funds to pay for all low and moderate-income owner-occupants. Determining how to use CDBG funds to subsidize the public improvement. There are two approaches. First, a grantee could pay for the public improvements upfront using CDBG if the project otherwise meets a national objective and the project was carried out in compliance with all applicable requirements, such as environmental, citizen participation, and Davis-Bacon. The grantee would then recover assessments from non-LMI persons after the improvements are complete, and then would receipt the recovered funds as program income. Alternatively, a grantee could pay for the special assessments on behalf of LMI persons on the back end as long as the project meets a national objective and the project was carried out in compliance with all applicable requirements, such as environmental, citizen participation, and Davis-Bacon. The grantee would then pay the special assessment on behalf of all properties owned or occupied by LMI persons, or the grantee could just pay the assessments of low-income persons if there is insufficient funding to assist the moderate-income persons. Another administration issue to consider is how many low-income property owners and how many moderate-income property owners live in the assessment district or area. This information may impact a grantee's decision on which method of subsidy they use, such as paying for the project upfront using CDBG funds, or paying the individual low and moderate income property owners' assessments on the back end. Finally, it is important for grantees to consider how to design and implement an income qualification process to qualify all potential beneficiaries of special assessments in a designated low and moderate income area. Thank you for watching the topical capacity building component of the Public Facilities and Improvements module. We learned how to use CDBG funds in support of new housing construction and how to approach administering special assessments. Please proceed to the reinforced component of this module for a brief quiz to test your knowledge.